Right. So talking of far and away the best, the opposite of that is what we have to finish with. And unfortunately, I allocated that to you, Craig, because I didn't want to do it.
Well, that's all right. I understand entirely.
And I backseated the other ones first. So Mortal Kombat.
This is what happens with me having become an infrequent contributor now. I just don't get the pickings of the best. Mortal Kombat, then, or what happens when an unstoppably stupid idea meets an immovably dumb fan base? Well, I'm not going to waste my time or yours trying to explain a movie based on a series of arcade fighting games that will celebrate its 30th anniversary next year. Mortal Kombat's selling point as a game all those years ago was its hyper-violent combat and finishing moves, rendered on screen using what were, for the time, fairly realistic digitised representations of its combatants. The main complaint people had with Mortal Kombat the movie some 3 years or so later was that said violence was almost entirely absent. What, you may ask, is the point in making a movie based on the most plot-bereft genre of video games if you remove the one thing it had going for it? Well, looky here, it's Mortal Kombat 2021 to answer all your alternate reality questions, proving, hopefully conclusively, that if you take a movie with no plot and no violence, then add some violence, you'll end up with a movie with some violence. There are people among us who enjoyed Mortal Kombat 1995, and I'm not here to judge them. Much. Those people felt that the only thing missing from that movie was the gore, but now that we find ourselves on this branching timeline of reality we call the 2020s, many of those same people are now moaning that Mortal Kombat 2021 is missing the plot. Seriously, this, it transpires, is the result of the more recent entries in the gaming franchise leaning into soap opera storytelling that has, apparently, actually won them some awards. Now, I've played those games, and I did not notice anything resembling a plot, but if we assume these people making such claims are being honest interlocutors, then it seems like a great shame the makers of this reboot have missed the mark again, albeit coming from the opposite direction. I'm not here to deny anyone the pleasure of the things they enjoy the most, and I do genuinely wish that they had received the plot and the gore that they so desperately wanted, and, I have to assume, deserved. I will say that the one thing which could have elevated this movie at least a little would have been a smidgen more self-awareness and much more of a sense of fun. Okay, that's two things, but clearly no one is listening, and certainly no one will hear me say, the first movie didn't have any plot either. That's just something we've been nodding along to up until now because the people who extol that are dangerous, unstable individuals. There are moments where Mortal Kombat 2021 threatens to enjoy itself, mainly embodied by Kano, one of the heart-ripping bad guys of the series, played here by Josh Lawson, who brings some welcome Aussie humour to the mix. But mainly, it's taking itself way too seriously, and if you're not a fan of the games, then, frankly, there's no particular reason you should so much as hover over the play button, and that's about as much as I care to say about that.
You remember earlier this evening, Craig, I said that I hadn't watched Without Remorse. Perhaps one of the reasons for that is because what I decided to do, and now I've got a bone to pick with you and Scott, because if you were any sort of good friends, you would have already made a podcast episode several years ago in which you warned anybody off of watching Mortal Kombat. I watched Mortal Kombat.
Oh no.
Because I'd never seen it.
Done?
The original I'm talking about, I had never seen it. And I watched that. And what a terrible, 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 terrible film that is.
I think you mean cult classic, which is apparently what some people consider it to be.
I mean, it absolutely misses the point, because at the time, Mortal Kombat was a middling fighting game with a gimmick, and they made a film that completely eschewed the gimmick. So, but well done them. That was smart. But yeah, a truly, truly awful film. Mortal Kombat 2021 is also a terrible, terrible film, but more just terrible, terrible rather than terrible, 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 terrible. And it looks a bit nicer, and that's about it. It's like they've gone out of their way to find the people with the least charisma possible.
Yep.
And basically, while he's not the best thing I've ever seen, this film is utterly intolerable anytime Josh Lawson's not talking.
Yeah.
He's the only thing that makes this even vaguely bearable. What a pile of crap.
I see a lot of people discussing online the fact that they think the guy playing Sub-Zero was absolutely amazing. And I can only suggest that perhaps those people were watching a different film to me.
Playing's a bit of a strange word to use. I mean,
Yes.
had his clothes on, maybe.
Yes, he's certainly showing his eyes through his headgear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't help that he's lumbered with some of the worst dialogue I have possibly heard ever, and that's not hyperbole. Is that when he walks up to Shang Tsung, and I've seen him Chin Han be considerably more charismatic. Everything just like being directed with no charisma in this film as well, I think, or just like don't care about it. But and he calls him Bihan, and he says, "I'm not Bihan, I'm Sub-Zero now," and it's basically the worst line I've ever heard ever, and also the worst line reading. It's so poor and awkward,
and also one of those, as you know, boss, I'm not Bihan anymore.
Yeah, that's it. And fortunately, this isn't as bad as the 1985 film for that, which was appalling. It was like name drops all the way through, or like catchphrase drops. It was terrible, but this film is intolerable. It's boring. It's all the gore's kind of distasteful, actually, because I think Mortal Kombat got to the point where actually, when it was kind of fun as a gimmick when it was all digitized. Now it's kind of realistic. It's actually kind of stomach turning. I think they've gone a bit too far.
Yeah, I think it was too realistic when the magic cat that was acting like a buzzsaw cut the flying woman in half. Yeah. I thought that was too grisly realistic. I mean, that could be just a scene out of modern day life, really.
Which is ironically probably the bit now in retrospect hearing about it, I would probably think, haha, that would be quite funny. But I missed because I went to the bathroom and I thought, well, there's no point in pausing this for 2 minutes while I nip to the loo.
Realistic as in like the effect on a body. It's like, this kind of unpleasant now. I don't care to watch it.
Yes. I'm not going to pretend that I was not amused for parts in Mortal Kombat. Particularly, I think a lot of the bits that I like should have been in a different film. Like the kind of the somewhat more grounded fights that they have. There's some decent fight choreography in there, particularly that early fight in the kind of samurai era where the original Scorpion gets killed at the start. All that fight is pretty well done.
Yeah,
but could probably be done in another film.
The fights are certainly better than they were in the first film, which they barely non-existent in the first film.
Yes, and I think in general, the more effects they start layering onto it, the worse they get, and the less interesting they are. I mean, I enjoyed this film mainly because I treated it the same way that I treated the Mortal Kombat games, which was to say I skipped the cutscenes. So anytime people were talking, I'd be hitting hit the skip 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds.
Let us not pretend this is the point of a fighting game.
Yes.
I thought you were saying, Craig, about the people saying that they've got good plots and stuff. Now, I've heard lots of people talk about that, saying like the Mortal Kombat 11, the time jumping thing. I was like, oh, it's really good. Like, really? Yeah. Barely any video games have plots that are actually good.
Yeah, I'm willing to take people's word for that. I'll never know for definite because I'm never not going to mash the X button to get through all of that.
Yeah. There are points of it that I liked. I did watch most of Kano's dialogue, which tended to be quite funny. I could live with that. The way he keeps wanting a fireball. And it's like, got a laser. That's better than a fireball.
I wonder if he actually had anything like ad-libbing his lines on, because his lines, it can't be just his delivery. He's got the only good lines in the film. Like, everything else is just so leaden. And like, I wonder if he kind of spice up a bit.
It's like he's the only character that knows he's in a game based on a film based on a video game, and everyone else is taking it as seriously as they possibly can. He's the only one having any sort of fun with it.
Hasn't he got a sort of background in comedy? I'm not really familiar with him, but I want to say I checked his IMDb profile a while back, and I think I wouldn't be surprised to find he's had some input in that.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen him before.
He's in Anchorman 2, but I don't really recall the character. That's about the only thing I know him from. I mean, I'd be prepared to watch him again now because he's the only thing that made this film tolerable.
Yeah, and interestingly, I don't know if it really... Well, from what you're saying, Greg, I guess this is where it's at. I've not read any reviews or reaction to Mortal Kombat at all, but it feels like it's fallen somewhat between trying to make a film adaptation and trying to make a fan service film, and didn't quite nail either. Like, if you want to talk about this as a film, then you could batter it on like a number of films, but like fronts. But there's way too many characters for a film, but for a piece of fan service, there's not enough of them. It should have more of the character, all that kind of stuff. So it's like they didn't know quite where they were aiming for.
Yeah.
As I say, there's maybe 20 minutes worth of stuff in here that I actually found some enjoyment from. So I may be a bit more positive than I read to you guys. But then again, this was really in a context where you can happily skip forward, skip to the next bit that's actually going to be up. You think might be appealing. If I had to sit and watch this in a theatre where I didn't have a remote control, I can only imagine how much I would have hated it. So that's my only recommendation that I can. If you must watch Mortal Kombat, make sure you can skip large chunks of it, because lots of it's not very good.
I didn't skip any of it because it's just not how I do. I can confirm that I hated it. So
for me, the only reason I have any sense of disappointment about this whatsoever, because under normal conditions you just wouldn't expect anything from it anyway. But I actually thought the trailer for it when it landed was quite entertaining, and I laughed at it. And I think I came out of that thinking, oh, right, okay, this is going to have a really good balance and actually just be really good fun. And it just isn't. It just isn't. And it's just I was going to say it'd be a fatal flaw if it didn't sound a little bit too close to I was making a bad pun about fatalities or something. But it's just not a good movie. It's just not a good movie. It's not a fun time, and that's the one thing that this movie needed to be more than anything else.
Absolutely,
yeah. Especially, it didn't have a terrible CGI lizard character that looked like Steve Buscemi's character from Monsters Inc. So it clearly fails.
There is that. Oh, time to go and download Nobody.